Hi guys, welcome back to the Ignite SAT Mastery Program. Today, we'll be covering Lesson 2 of Module 4, Rational Operations. Now, as a refresher, what are these rational operations questions? Now, these questions are going to look a little something like this. You're going to have an expression over another expression, as you can see in both of these cases, and usually these are going to be reduced to something else using a very specific operation. Now, as you can see in question 15, this is using a variable x, but in question 11, the imaginary number I is being used. Note that I and x serve the same purpose in these kind of questions, and you will see that later on. Now, let's try answering one of these questions. Taking a look at question 15, we see the expression 5x minus 2 over x plus 3 is equivalent to which of the following? And as we look through the answer choices, we see that 5 is no longer bound to x. 5x is no longer a term. So somehow we have to get rid of the x by the 5. And the only way we can do that is division and reducing. Now, let's think about this for a second. We have x plus 3 as the term on the bottom. So we can reduce and split from that term alone. So how are we supposed to get x plus 3 up top? Now, 5x minus 2 can certainly not reduce to x plus 3 in any way. But let's think a little outside the box. What if it was 5x plus, say, 15? But we can't just add 15 to the top. We also have to remove 15 from the top as well. Now, this may be a little hard to follow, but just bear with me. We're adding 15 to the top, right? So we can factor out an x plus 3 from the 5x plus 15. But if we were to add something to the top, we also need to subtract that same value to make sure the value of the expression does not change. Hence, we subtract minus 15 as well. So this is how we get to our first step, which will guide us throughout the entire process. Now, let's move on. Let's factor out this 5x plus 3, minus 15 and minus 2. And now we have that factor term out. So now we can figure out a way to get rid of this x bound to the 5. So let's continue. We have 5x plus 3 over x plus 3 as a term, and minus 15 minus 2 over x plus 3. So let's finally reduce and see what we'll get. And we finally end up with 5 as we divide the x plus 3's away from that term, and we get negative 17 over x plus 3. Did you see what we did there? All we did was add a constant to the top and subtract that same constant so the value of the entire expression stayed the exact same. And once we did that, we just utilized that information to factor out our own expression. And in that case, we got an answer that exactly lines up with what is given. Let's try this one more time, but this time you guys are going to go for it. Try answering this question. Now that you've had a chance to answer this question, let's go through it. And for the most part, this is going to be the same process. Now, we have an 8 plus 2i on the bottom. But if we look at the top, how are we supposed to factor out an 8 plus 2i when there is nothing else there? Now, we can't just add and subtract i's and all of that willy-nilly. Now, that is not allowed. But what we can do is use something called the conjugate method. Now, the conjugate method is when you multiply the bottom phrase by the conjugate to get rid of the I or the middle term. In this case, we know that I squared is going to be negative 1. So we can remove that I completely from the bottom and have a chance of splitting these terms. So that's what we did. We multiplied the bottom by 8 minus 2i, just so the two i's would cancel out. Now, whatever we do to the bottom, we have to do to the top. So let's follow through with this expression. We then get 24 minus 46i plus 10i squared on top and 64 minus 4i squared on the bottom. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to simplify this I. I squared can be rewritten as what? Yes, negative 1. And once we do that, we have this term. And once we have that term, we can continue simplifying this expression. And we'll get 14 minus 46i over 68. Now, notice all of these terms are split into two. A through D all have two terms. So let's do the same thing. Let's split this up into two once we reduce, and once we split this up into two, you can see we get an answer, and this answer is in fact C. Now, here are some tips. The first thing you want to do is simplify. Now, as hard as it might sound for some questions, in reality, simplifying can just be, pulling out any factors or common expressions and dividing, as we saw in the first question. Now, if you can't get anywhere from doing that, the next thing you're going to do is use the conjugate. And the conjugate is almost a surefire way you can get to the answer you are looking for. Once you multiply by the conjugate, you're going to want to reduce. And once you reduce these expressions, you're going to want to split them. And once you have them split, it will align exactly with one of the answers provided in the answer choices. Alright, next time, we're going to be covering solving for x for linear solutions.